Right, so that's me, Peter Jones, of CherryPop Games. I'd like to start by just saying a big thank you to Steel Media for the opportunity of talking here today. It's a great venue, and what a great city. It's my first time here, and I think it's a wonderful place to be. CherryPop Games, we are the makers of Sports Bar VR, and it was a successful social game. Unlike the previous speaker, we went for the more console-orientated solutions. We're not yet on mobile. We will be doing something in the mobile space, but at the moment, no. We launched on HTC Vive in June 2016 through to the Oculus Rift in December of that year. My talk today, and it's funny that the last one ended on the same subject, is money in VR. So many people have said so many times, there's no money in VR. And what I wanted to do is just give a personal perspective on that and talk about what we've done in the space. So, start off, and I promise I won't descend into stat hell or any great market insights or anything of that nature. What I started off looking at is the number of user reviews that a game has on Steam. Start with Steam. So you're talking Vive and Rift, of course, on Steam. So I'm looking at user reviews as an analogy of game downloads. I know it's not a direct line and it's a bit rough and dirty, but the two do follow in line. So if you kind of bear with me on that one a little bit. So what proportion of Steam VR games have had 0 to 10 user reviews? There's 1,600 games, VR games, on Steam right now. What proportion have had 0 to 10 user reviews? I'll go off script a bit. Anyone want to give a guess? 0, I wish. No, the figure is 55%. So over half the games on Steam have done 0 to 10 user reviews. I know that's not a strict definition of what they've sold, but it kind of does go in line. That's how the figures drill down. You've got the 55% there, 0 to 10, and the 11 to 50. I mean, 50 is still not a big number of user reviews, is another 29%. And then you've got that tiny little wedge at the top there. That's a 2%, which is over 500 user reviews. Fortunately, we managed to get ourselves into that bracket. So to look at it another way, 84% of games on Steam have less than 50 user reviews. 2% of games on Steam have more than 500. So there's a huge polarization there. And the talk of my talk today is there's no money in VR. So I think I proved that, so we can all go home now. But hang on a minute. We did. We actually did make money out of VR. Somebody's already going, look. And I wanted to look at that just purely from a kind of a personal perspective, if you like. And to an extent, I think the first point I'd make is that Steam, the VR games on Steam, is kind of a microcosm of Steam generally. If you look at non-VR games, there's a whole bunch of those that have had very few user reviews anyway. So we're kind of just, we're focusing on a smaller pond. You know, it's a smaller number. So it's kind of a microcosm of that wider market, I guess, in a way. And I think the other thing is, you know, there was all this hype about what VR was going to do, and it kind of tainted the way that people viewed it in the early stages. You know, if you go back in time, there was numbers circulating, you know, that Rift would do 90 to 150 million units. Of course it was. And PSVR, you know, right up to its launch, people were saying that it was going to do 3 million units out there. And in fairness, I don't think Sony ever said any of those things. I think it was just market analysts, as it were. But nevertheless, those numbers were being bandied around, and it raised an expectation. And I think, to a large extent, I don't know what everyone else's view of this is, but I actually think that PSVR was a success. It's done over 1 million units, for God's sake. You know, it's got one Christmas under its belt. And it's sold well. But I don't think we should just look at, if we just look at PSVR for a moment, I don't think we should just look at PSVR as just the hardware units. We should look at what games have done on it. And number of paid VR games on Steam, that's 1,600 figure we talked about before. Number of paid VR games on PlayStation VR, 180. Huge difference. You know, straight off, there's a huge difference. And looking at that same statistic, a proportion of games having 0 to 10 user reviews on PSVR, I was going to say Steam then, on PSVR, is, anyone want to guess that one? 55 was the last number. Go on then. 5. Huge difference. 5. And drilling down again, you've got that 5% right at the top, that tiny little wedge. Next one is 29%, 11 to 50s. And the 500, over 500 user reviews is 20%. So a third of VR games on PSVR have had less than 50 user reviews. And that's still not, you know, 50 is not a really big number. But 20% have had more than 500 user reviews, which is, you know, it's a respectable thing. So there is money in VR. We made money out of VR. We're not a big developer. We're a really small, independent developer. One of those titles that was in the top on both formats, well, it started off in Vive, but was done by one programmer. He put his art out of house. One programmer. And he managed to get in that 2% slot. You know, so people can make money out of VR. It's a new medium. And I think people are still kind of adjusting to that to an extent. And the last speaker was saying a similar type of thing. VR is different. It requires a different way of thinking. And I think in the early stages, a lot of people just viewed it as an extension to existing media. So that they looked at the game types that they'd done before, and they thought, we'll do a VR version. And it, you know, sometimes it works, yeah, okay, but it doesn't always translate. So I think in this, we have to remember that difference. And this next section is about our experiences. And again, I do emphasize this, is from a personal point of view, because some of the things that work for us may not, you know, work for other people, in that sort of way at least. I mentioned earlier that we were out fairly early on Rift. We were actually out in June, 1st of June it was, 2016. So we weren't there at the launch of Vive, but we're there pretty early in that format. We're out there on day one on PlayStation VR. It nearly bloody killed us to get the damn thing out. We're there on Rift for the launch of the touch controllers, bless them. And you know, being early on a format worked for us. It was good. You know, it was helpful. There's no doubt about that. But it was really a blessing in disguise. Well, a blessing and a curse in a way, because we were early. That helped. There was only a few games out when we launched. But by the same token, when we developed the game, we had no field of reference. When we started developing, there was no other VR games we could look at. So I know it sounds absolutely bloody crazy when, you know, we're this far into this whole new market and everything else. But we felt like pioneers. We felt like, you know, we were doing something completely new. And that feeling still in a way hasn't gone away. But we started with the viewpoint that we should look at the advantages that VR could bring to our game and build our game around that. And, you know, a central premises go. I don't think it was too bad a one in many ways. And for us, and I'll have this theme one or two times, quite a few times, social was the element. And I still remember the first time I saw another player in the game. It was obviously one of the guys from CherryPop. But the power of seeing somebody else online and talking to somebody else in that environment. Okay, it's just a pair of floating controllers and a headset. But the amount of emotion that can be conveyed from that was absolutely astonishing. And I'm not sure that in the early days we actually fully understood how big social gaming was going to be. We knew that it worked for our game, but there was no great insight of this is going to be a big slice. And I'd like to just give an anecdote, if I may. We had an incident quite early on in the development of the game. Our burglar alarm went off at 4 o'clock in the morning, phoned through to the phone, jumped in the car, shot into the office. Of course, you think the worst, all the equipment's going and everything else. When I got there, the police were all outside, tactical support unit, loads of them. They were swarming with them. Of course, it wasn't a burglary. The alarm had malfunctioned. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and we kind of felt a little bit guilty. So we did the English thing, and we made them a nice cup of tea. And half of them stayed on. They asked us what we did. We said we make VR games and explained a bit about what the game was. And they wanted to play. Bear in mind, it's still 4 o'clock in the morning. So we booted up the PlayStation VR, and a couple of the cops went in to play the game. And I was talking one of them through the controls. Deb over there was talking the other one through the controls. And all of a sudden, the guy that I was talking to, he said, "There's someone over there. I can see someone in the game." Of course, the other cop. I said, "That's your mate. That's the other officer." And he said, "Steve." Of course, he wouldn't recognize Steve because he did have a large chicken on his head at the time. "Steve, give us a wave, Steve." And all of a sudden, these hard-nosed cops in their flak jackets and the whole 9 yards were 10 years old. They were in the game, and they were transported through the power of social interaction. So for us, online was absolutely key. Social interaction was what we built our game around in many ways. And in the early stages, we only had 2 people online in any one lobby. With the PlayStation version, we increased it to 6. And with a new update, which is just about to hit, we've increased that figure to 12. But that kind of brings me on to another point, because I talked about our update, and regular updates are absolutely key to keeping a brand alive. If you're going to put a product out, don't just put a product out and expect it to continue in the way it does, because however well you think you've crafted it, VR is a new medium, as that previous speaker said, and feedback from the user base is key. So update, 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 and innovate all of the time in that title. I think one of the problems is for ourselves, we needed, we obviously need people online. For us, with social interaction, the oxygen of that game is having players online. And for us, that meant a few design decisions, and you can see that statement there. And in many ways, it's Achilles' heel. And we got around that by, in this new update, having cross-play between formats, which is something I really would advocate. It quite frankly was a bit of a bitch to do, but it was really, really powerful. It'll make a hell of a difference when that hits. One of the things that we had was a unique problem in a way, that we had 10 different game types, all requiring a different control method. So, and I'll touch on this a little bit later on, innovation is an absolute crucial thing. We found that we needed an almost permanent R&D effort, but I'll come on to that in a minute. Before I finish on the social side of it, we had the privilege of being featured at Facebook's Connect 3, and they were talking about the future of social gaming, and they used our game as a backdrop, which is a fantastic compliment. There's a quote there from Facebook. I won't bother reading it out because it takes time, but the point is that we use the games, the reason for this slide is that we use the game types in the game to give a purpose to the social interaction. Because it's okay people getting into a game space, and once they've sat down for a few minutes, they want to do something, you know. So you need to keep that fresh. You need new games. You need new things for them to do. And that's basically what that quote there is saying. So if I've got any recommendations, I'd say it's good to be early on a format. And, you know, okay, the key formats are out there, but there's format updates. There are new formats coming out all of the time. VR is only just getting started, guys. You know, this really still is early days here. I would advocate multi-format. We started in a console end rather than the mobile space, and we're kind of migrating over to that. Whether that's the right way around or not, I don't know. Time will tell. I would advocate from our point of view, if you look at the market, there have been some powerful games out there that haven't been online. So it's not a must-have, but for us, online was the key. And really and truly, the cross-play has brought a completely new dimension to that. So, you know, we felt that that was a really key aspect. I think to a large extent, the starting values that you have on any development goes right through and permeates into what the product becomes at the end of the day. And one of our starting premises, bearing in mind there was nothing for us to look at a frame of reference, was that we wanted a high production value. We wanted the world to feel like it was the real world. That was our, you know, number one objective. We had a number of gameplay objectives which we needed to fit around that. And just echoing the previous speaker, that there were a number of things that we had to look at, you know, in the early days on that. The whole motion sickness thing is a real issue. What we looked at as a solution for that is what we called Hulk mode, and we only give it it's kind of a stupid name internally, but it kind of stuck in the finished version, as these things do. But it's as if you've got two meat hooks in your hand to rotate and grab and pull the world around you. And it was able to make small adjustments to your position in the world. We found it useful to have a grid. When we first introduced it, we were getting a small amount of motion sickness, but having a grid in the world so that you can relate to how you're moving the world, actually, it helped in our case, and it tended to work. So I think the other aspect there is the sound aspect. Audio in the game is absolutely key. Particularly if you've got a large number of people in the lobby, you know, having zones of audio is a key aspect. I touched on this earlier. We had almost permanent R&D effort. We started off looking at this and thinking, right, okay, our R&D is going to take X amount of time, and it just continued. You know, R&D was the thing. And we kind of call it rapid prototyping. So we come up with an idea, we put it in game, and then we test it out on end users. And it's kind of worked for us. And this thing about being in the real world, I'd just like to show, if it goes on to it, this video now. I don't know whether my friend at the back there can orchestrate that. This is Mr. O'Sullivan.
First, welcome to virtual reality.
What's it like, Ron?
Oh, it's mental.
So those are the controls right
Wow.
What are you going for, the 6? Oh, mate.
That has freaked me right
Only
out.
you could lean on a virtual reality table.
Can I take these off? That is weird.
That was Ronnie thrilling to our table. And the reason he did that is it felt so real. And, of course, he leant on a table which wasn't there. I've put that on mainly because it's quite a funny clip, but also because there was a serious point to it. We were able to engineer a way around that and locking the cue as if the left hand was on the table if you're right-handed. So I'm looking at my time thing here. It's going down really, really quickly. So next couple of things I'll skip through fairly quickly. The team side of it, team communications. And as you can see, it's a good-looking team. You know, I think you can all agree on that one. It's a bit bigger now than it was then, but nevertheless. Team communications were key. We actually had to move offices when we started VR because we needed more physicality around each desk. You need more room, of one thing. And we use Slack. We found it to be, you know, a really good means of communication. And failing that, there's always the pub. And the last couple of things I'll say, and I've got 4 seconds on that thing left, is that innovate, always look to how you can change VR and do something that someone's not done before. We've come up with a few new things, which I can't announce yet today, but we've looked at it, and there's so much room in VR to do this. So innovate, innovate, innovate. The future's great, guys. There's loads of new formats coming out. There's loads of innovation on existing formats. And that's the end of my bit.